Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglia. We are going to probably be talking a lot in the next, 3 or 4 weeks about mostly the same stuff. I've brought it up before. The things that are going to be competing for the most attention or getting the legislature the most emails and the most complaints about the problems that haven't been fixed. And I think public safety is going to be top down, hands down, without a doubt. It's going to be the top issue. Every time I turn around, it's not just in this state as well. It's all over, but we have criminals from other states, mostly with respect to drug dealing, coming to this state because it's so easy to get put back out on the street after you're caught committing a crime, especially if you're a juvenile, because this state wants to treat people as old as 22 as juveniles. So one of the things that struck me, I found an article it's a commentary on Vermont Daily Chronicle. Best crime victim says Vermont taxes criminal justice getting worse and worse. And this is December 28, 2025. This is by Aaron Bess. And I want to, as I'm reading this to you, I wanted you to think, ladies and gentlemen, how many of you have a friend or a neighbor or a family member who could tell you this, almost the same exact story? I know in my district, I could probably have a dozen people tell me this story. In fact, a dozen people in the last month have told me this story, or very similar. At 4:06 a.m. this morning, I woke up to my phone ringing, which has never in my life been a good thing. Surprisingly, I woke up and answered it. It was Barre City Dispatch asking me to come outside and talk to officers. My heart is racing with thoughts of if my sons are okay, is my family and friends okay? They got a report of someone checking car doors and rummaging through the unlocked ones in the neighborhood. I come outside to see a stranger next to my little red car being detained. What's going on? Half awake, I asked the officer, making his way toward me slowly. Fresh snow had fallen and my driveway is slick. He slips and falls pretty hard. Really hope he's okay. Fills me in and says they tracked his footprints off Summer Street to my house on Mill. We saw fresh tracks around your pickup leading to your car, but that's where they stopped, the officer said. This dude was inside my car sleeping, quote unquote. Sleeping, he said. Baloney. He was hiding. He had a reusable shopping bag half full of stuff and a small blanket not big enough for a toddler. Rewind to spring of this year here. A house on Summer Street turned into a full-blown crack/trap house. Out-of-state plates. Junky cars not even worthy of scrapping, flying through the neighborhood full of zombie-looking people. This went on until the raid on Mother's Day. They pulled 4 folks from out of state out in this raid, none of which were the homeowner or the other locals that came and went from that house. The raid slowed things down, but they picked right back up again. One afternoon coming home from work, I had to lay on the horn to back into my own driveway as some chick was blocking access to my driveway. This went on till mid-November when whoever bought the house was able to get the former owner out. Long story short, I absolutely love my community, my neighbors, our wonderful police force, and firefighters. And I want to break from this. This is a common thread, ladies and gentlemen. It's common thread. And you know, here at Right Side Up, we support our law enforcement officers. I don't care whose badge you wear. If you're a law enforcement, we support you here. If you're a firefighter, if you're an EMT, thank you for doing what you do. I want to read this again. Long story short, I absolutely love my community, my neighbors, our wonderful police force, and firefighters. The Crack House brought us together for monthly meetings to figure out a way to handle these issues. We invited the state's attorney, our town representatives, and extended the invite even further to our lawmakers. I'm a fifth-generation Vermonter through and through. I love the state most days, but what I don't love is becoming worse and worse. First is how horribly bad we are taxed. Agree, 100%, Mr. Bess. Let's see, Aaron Bess. Let's see. First is how horribly bad we are taxed. Definitely, without a doubt. Especially the working class folks that keep your home warm, repaired, and safe. Second is our horribly failed judicial system. And I want to break again because it's very important to understand that the police officers are only doing one part of the criminal justice part, okay? There's a number of parts. First, somebody has to call and report what is behavior that looks out of the ordinary, and then the police go and they investigate. If they find something that's criminal, then they can effect arrest. But then they have to go and depend on the judicial system. And the judicial system, partly because our legislature has twisted it up and made it so bad that our judicial system is not actually working for hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding Vermonters. It only works to turn out criminals over and over and over again. And it's not only turning homeowners and residents like Mr. Bess here off, it's totally demoralizing police, fire, EMS workers because they're trying to do their job. They're getting hurt in the process of doing their job. And some, hopefully not too many, but some are throwing their hands up and saying the hell with this because they feel like they're just paddling upstream and there's no end in sight. Back to the article here. We all see it. Try to ignore how sad it's becoming just in our area. Panhandlers, homelessness, and the crime it brings. Worst part is these folks are breaking the law, get maybe a slap on the wrist, and are right back out there doing the same thing. While us hardworking folk are busting our tails to support ourselves and help one another make it through another hard year in this tax-happy state. Vermont needs to do better for its Vermonters. Before you know it, us hardworking folk that keep us this infrastructure running are going to be sick of it. I know I am. Now, I bring this up. I want to talk about this because I can guarantee everybody listening has got a friend, a family member, or a neighbor who has been through this, and they're sick of it. And I agree with you. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of hearing about it. And the one thing you can do is get involved like this gentleman did with his neighbors, but also legislature.vermont.gov. Find out who your legislators are. Find out who the ones in the Judiciary Committee are. Find out what all of the legislators in other areas where you read about similar crimes like this, who are they? What are the laws they support, they sponsor, they co-sponsor? This session coming up is going to have some law enforcement related bills in the Judiciary Committee that are going to be debated and voted out of committee. Watch. You have the ability to watch some of these committee hearings live stream, or you can actually watch them at a later date because they're recorded, and get a feel for who is actually supporting what and who is voting against your peace of mind, because that's what it is. If you don't feel safe in your neighborhood, as this gentleman is talking about, he and his neighbors don't, then there's a reason. And the reason is because the lawmakers you've had in the recent past, I'm saying in the last 10 or 15 years, were putting statutes in effect that were taking away your sense of security. That's what they did. That's what they're continuing to try to do. They're kicking the can down the road. They're coming up with more solutions to problems that they've created instead of fixing the original problem. If there's crime, solve it. And if there's somebody who's a repeat offender, put them in jail. Get them the rehabilitation that you think that they'll be able to handle. And if they can't, then they need to stay in jail. They need to stay in jail. If they're a repeat offender and they're not willing to live in a civil society and act like a civil member of society, then why do we keep turning them out? Only to injure or maybe eventually murder a hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding citizen. Or how many times have you heard of, there was just another thing I was looking at, scrolling through Facebook earlier today. Law enforcement was injured in Barry. Again, same town where this gentleman was writing his commentary about, trying to deal with a repeat offender who keeps getting out over and over and over again. Learned there are no circumstances. There's no circumstances to their behavior. And this is what's happening. People are angry. They're fed up. And I understand. So I will not stop behind this microphone asking, imploring people, please find out who all of the legislators are that are affecting these changes that have made you feel less safe, that have made you actually less safe. So that when you go home and go to sleep at night, and the last thought is, what am I going to find broken into or lost that someone else decided they wanted or they needed to swap for their next hit? This has really gotten to a point where it's out of control, ladies and gentlemen, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop. And one of the ways I think we get it to stop is and I hope if there's anybody in law enforcement out there, we would love to hear from you. We really would. Because, we want you to be able to have a career in law enforcement that you obviously want, but to be able to have a productive career, hopefully keep your family here, have a family here, raise a family here, and retire here. And I mean retire healthy so that maybe you can go on to another career. Or if you want to stay in law enforcement for the entirety of your working tenure, that would be great. But not to be injured, and I know sometimes it happens, but it's happening all too often because the same repeat offenders are doing the same thing and getting turned out. It's like a broken record. It's like a skip in a record every day. It's just the only difference it feels like is the date on the complaint. And that needs to change. That needs to change. So I just, when I saw this article, I just wanted to cover it. There's so much other stuff to deal with. But it's just really so sad to see that one of the safest states in the union has become what it has become. And these are easily fixed, but we must have the will to do something. And the idea that somebody has been a victim somewhere in their past, so it's okay for them to victimize the rest of the neighborhood because they were a victim one time, is got to stop. It's got to stop. These people need to be looked in the eye and told they're going to get help or they're going to stay in confinement. They're going to stay in confinement because civil society needs to have law and order, constitutional order. And people need to be able to go back to, hopefully we will get back to a place where I can go down to a meeting or to the general store, local general store, and talk to people about how they feel like they don't have the need to be locking their vehicles and their homes in neighborhoods where they never, ever had to do that before. So, well, That's part of my rant for this segment, ladies and gentlemen. We've run out of time for this one. We'll pay some bills, and then we'll be right back. You're listening to Right Side Up. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. I want to switch gears, talk a little bit about one of the things I think that this state is wasting too much time and too much money on, instead of putting effort into law enforcement, public safety, making everyone feel like Vermont is getting back to being one of the safest states to live in. This one is from Behind the Lines, Rob Roper's article. This is his Substack. LOL. Climate Council afraid to request $800,000 for GWSA project. Let's see. Last Monday's Climate Council meeting featured a tense conversation about putting a price tag on what they call the number one priority recommendation in their updated climate action plan. And just to break from this again, we have better priorities, other priorities for the state right now than a climate action plan. We have H518, which is a climate superfund repeal bill on the wall in Environment Committee right now. It would save a minimum of $350,000, stop all of the infrastructure and the full-time employees that would go with that, because we don't have the money and we don't have the time. So that would be one thing. And then we can stop this $800,000 going to this plan. Let me get back to the article here. The project, a mandatory reporting system for carbon emissions from fuel suppliers and other significant emitters. The price tag, as requested by the Agency of Natural Resources, $800,000. Why is this a priority? Because it will set the stage for a statewide quote-unquote cap and invest carbon tax on home heating and transportation fuels that nobody wants. That's right. We don't want any more taxes, any more fees, any number added on top of our home heating oil prices, our propane prices, our off-road diesel, our on-road diesel, our gasoline, you name it. We don't want any more taxes on it. The crux of the argument was whether or not the council should endorse the number 800,000 or just vaguely say, now you go do that. One side, articulated by council member David Mears, was for being upfront with the legislature about their goals. And this is, let's see, from one of the David Mears. This is a top priority cap and invest program, and I would like to show up aggressively as the council and say this is a priority and we think you should fund this. And this, and even suggest funding levels. If we're going to ramp up and build towards a cap and invest type program, the agency needs time to build and the resources and the staff to do that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the first segment of the show today, I covered something where we really need to be taking this $800,000 and putting it into more law enforcement officers statewide, sheriffs, town police, city police, VSP. That's where we need to invest. Public safety. This is a boondoggle, this cap and invest program. It's a boondoggle. Everybody knows, and like the author in the commentary in the previous segment, we're already unaffordable. We don't need any more. Stop. This next budget, just to break again from the article, this next budget for this year, we should be talking about cuts. Last year's was north of $9 billion. Let's bring it in less than $9 billion this year. Let's bring it in the low to mid eights. Show a little bit of fiscal restraint. What do you say, ladies and gentlemen? In the other side, summed up back to the article here. The other side, summed up by Council Member Richard Cowart succinctly, I'm afraid of asking for that much money will be a poison pill and we won't get half a program. We'll get nothing. A possibility Mears raised himself. That much money, a poison pill, $800,000. And herein lies the core kernel of the grand lie that is the Global Warming Solutions Act and its mandates that are in any way, shape, or form even remotely feasible policies for the state to have in statute. $800,000 for a state with a $9.2 billion budget, ladies and gentlemen, is a drop in the bucket. And it's still too much to ask, given all of the other fiscal crises Vermont has to deal with. And we just talked about, again, in the previous segment, public safety. Take this money, say no to the Global Warming Solutions Act, the cap and invest $800,000 into public safety. Why? Because we need to feel safe. Everybody needs to feel safe. And they don't. It's a fact. So if the Climate Council recognizes that $800,000 for just collecting the data necessary to move forward with a cap and invest program is an unaffordable, unreasonable request, what does that say about the viability of the actual freaking program the data collection is supposed to be the launch pad for? And I agree with the author here. Cap and invest will mean billions in real or de facto taxes on fossil fuels. Let me say that again. Cap and invest will mean billions in real or de facto taxes on fossil fuels and will cost the state tens of millions of dollars to operate, hundreds of millions if the program includes safety net provisions for low-income Vermonters. In other words, safety net provisions, meaning subsidies. Your money for somebody who says they can't afford it, ladies and gentlemen. It ain't happening. I hope the author is correct that it ain't happening. It's not just me saying this. The Vermont State Treasurer compiled an in-depth report just last spring on cap and invest and determined, quote, I conclude there are no viable cap and invest programs available to Vermont at this time, end quote. There still aren't, and there won't be. The great hope these kooks were holding out for was that New York would implement their cap and invest program, and we could somehow glom onto it. But even Governor Kathy Hochul has come to realize the scheme is insane, unaffordable, economically and politically suicidal, so scratch that option, Vermont. Unless you, like New York, is coming to its senses, at least for the foreseeable future. Unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. We are wasting our time and wasting our money on the wrong policies and the wrong things. Okay. And keep in mind, this is just number one of a top 10 list of priority recommended programs, which themselves are just the highlights of a quote-unquote plan consisting of some 250 total recommendations. These include expand the Flood Resiliency Communities Fund, increase funding for existing programs, weatherize homes, support utility programs, identify funding and support for needed workforce, electrification of vehicles and buildings. Let's hear the Climate Council's recommended funding levels for all of this spending as well. I'll bet it's a heck of a lot more than $800,000, and I agree with the author. It's probably way more. Electrification. I want to go back to some of these here. How about we cut everybody's taxes so that we can have, let's see, people can weatherize their homes on their own dime, on their own time, because they can afford to do that. How about that, ladies and gentlemen? Because if you cut taxes, people have more money in their paycheck. They'll have more money in their savings account. They'll have more money in their checking account to do whatever the hell they want. Electrification of vehicles and buildings. We've talked about this before. You want to buy an EV, go for it. You want to buy a hybrid, go for it. Nobody in this state, in fact, the majority of people in this state, don't want to be told what kind of vehicle to buy. They don't want to be told that. And they don't want to be told that they have to put a heat pump in when we're staring down the barrel at another cold snap. Excuse me. Let me see here. This is a farce. It's time to stop wasting money on it. The millions of tax dollars Vermonters are pouring into this endless studying of and laying the groundwork for programs that will never be implemented to meet mandates that can never be met. At this point, nothing more than theater of the absurd. It's time to dissolve the Climate Council. Its proposals are going nowhere. Scrap the Climate Action Office. Its purpose is to implement programs that don't exist and won't exist. Repeal the Global Warming Solutions Act and the vestigial infected appendix of a law that is the Clean Heat Standard, Act 18. Repeal the going nowhere Climate Superfund law that will only lead to millions in legal bills for the state, aka us. Take the money and put it towards something useful. Better yet, give the money back to us taxpayers so we can spend it on something useful, or our track record is better than yours. So, I agree with the author in this article. The Climate Superfund needs to be repealed. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, H518 is a bill that's on the wall to repeal it. Stop wasting time. Stop wasting money. We need to spend that money elsewhere. The Global Warming Solutions Act, there are a number of options. One of them is repeal of the whole statute. The other is to just change the statute from mandates to goals so that the state does not set its up. Well, we've already set ourselves up, but the state does not wind up in more lawsuits because we can say, sorry, we changed the law. It's just a goal. Don't waste your time trying to sue us again. The Clean Heat Standard. It needs to be paused at the very least. It needs to be repealed at the very best. What else? The Renewable Energy Standard. How about we stop telling everybody what to do and when to do it, except when it comes to enforcement of the laws that keep people safe, like going back to the first segment again. If you violated the law, if you committed a crime, then how about we implement those laws and have the letter of those laws be followed to the T? How about we do that? Instead of having all of these climate laws. Because if you look, geology and other sciences, including the study of how the sun affects the weather on this planet, how volcanoes affect the weather on this planet. What about we look at all of those so that we can find out the truth and know that we as men and women, are not the cause of climate change, because the climate has been changing ever since Earth has been Earth, so that we can stop wasting money and put money back in the taxpayer's pocket where it belongs. We should be looking at programs that are wasteful, that are full of fraud, and trimming them or completely stopping them. This $9.2 billion, like the article that Rob Roper wrote. $9.2 billion. Think about that. I'll bet if we looked hard enough, we could probably find at least $1.5 to $2 billion of areas where we could cut. And if we could cut that, then we would have probably an affordable state where we wouldn't be worried about the education taxes, then would we? We need more common sense in the State House, ladies and gentlemen. We need more representatives and senators who understand that common sense cannot be checked at the door, ladies and gentlemen. It needs to be dragged in. It needs to be thought about at every level. Every day there's a debate, no matter the bill, no matter the cost. Common sense. We need to be going through these bills with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we don't find that the law of unintended consequences is crushing the taxpayers and landowners, because we know that it is. Act 181 is going to crush rural Vermont if we let it. That's the future land use maps. and other things in Act 181. So there are things we can be doing, ladies and gentlemen, and dealing with climate solutions is not one of them that's going to make this state affordable or safer. We're going to have to take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to Right Side Up. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. Before we get into our next segment, I just want to remind our listeners, if for some reason you're unable to catch us on the radio on WNTK.com, go to WNTK.com. Click on the podcast button, scroll down to Right Side Up, and you'll be able to listen to any number of our shows. You can listen to them any time of the day or night. And you can also send them to a friend, and I hope you will. You can listen to us on Podbean. You can catch us on 802 Scoop Facebook, 802 Scoop YouTube, and you can also catch us at GraniteGrock.com. So before I get into the next article I'd like to cover, I just hope everybody had a Merry Christmas. I hope they had a nice, quiet, safe Christmas. I hope everyone has a Happy New Year coming up. And as I'm recording today, there was quite a bit of an ice storm, and it's supposed to get pretty frigid tonight. I'm actually recording just before, the day before this show airs. So be safe out there. It's probably going to be pretty icy, pretty frigid, a little bit slippery, and there's probably going to be quite a few trees down on wires and stuff. So just be careful out there. This next article I'd like to cover. This appears in Vermont Daily Chronicle as well. This is from December 29th. Guy Page, director of state-funded nonprofit, busted for embezzlement. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but there are north of 6,000 nonprofits operating in the state of Vermont today. And with this article, I'm going to read through it, but keep in mind, because I'm wondering who's doing the auditing of these nonprofits, and how much of this kind of stuff that's in this article is going on with all the other nonprofits. Let's see here. Montpelier Police have arrested a former executive director of the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation following an investigation into the misuse of organizational funds. According to a press release issued Saturday, the Montpelier Police Department began investigating a report on July 19, alleging that misappropriation of company funds at VCEDC. The organization reported that its then executive director, Melissa Bowney, 42, of Waitsfield, had used company money for personal purposes. CVEDC is one of 12 nonprofit regional development corporations in the state of Vermont, according to its website. It was organized in 1976 to provide impetus for the region's economic development. The volunteer board of directors is comprised of local business owners, state representatives, lenders, and municipal officials. Funding primarily comes from the state of Vermont, our municipalities, and dues-paying members of CVEDC. Let's see. According to the CVEDC website, the organization's fiscal year 2025 annual revenue was $552,560, including $147,856 from the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and $75,000 for a Department of Labor intern. The organization also received $149,247 in federal U.S. Department of Agriculture funding. Police said a lengthy investigation determined that Bowney embezzled approximately $71,151.73 from CVEDC during her tenure as executive director, which spanned from 2022 to 2025. According to Vermont Digger, Bounty was placed on administrative leave in July. Bounty has been cited to appear in Washington County Superior Court Criminal Division on January 15, 2026 at 8:30 a.m. to answer to felony embezzlement charges. According to the Vermont Regional Development Corporation's website, Bounty acted as one of two statewide navigators in the Small Business Administration-funded Community Navigator pilot program to facilitate pandemic response projects that linked Vermont businesses with Vermont vendors on service projects. Prior to working with CVEDC, Bounty spent 6 years working with Waitsfield-based book publisher Chuseko, where she managed editorial, print production, and licensing for the company. She has also been a member of the board of directors for the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center. She graduated from Johnson State College in 2005 after attending Hampshire College and Aegean Center for the Fine Arts. Now, I wanted to cover this because there are a lot of nonprofits that do get the funding, some funding from the state of Vermont. They also, like this article states, there are some nonprofits in Vermont that get both state and federal funds. But who's watching the coffers? How often? The question comes, how often are these nonprofits audited by the state? How often are they audited by the federal government? And what are the requirements for audits if you're going to continue to get state and federal funds? So I think because, I've been watching the news lately, and I think in the past 3 to 5 weeks, there were probably at least 3 of these cases that came up. So I'm just wondering, here again, we talked about a $9.2 billion budget. We have somebody here who's facing charges of embezzlement. There's a lot of money out there, and for the sake of the hardworking taxpayers in Vermont, we need to be watching this money apparently a little bit more closely, because we've got this going on, and mom and dad all over the state, grandma and grandpa all over the state have fallen on hard times. And it would really be nice to know that we as a state are watching over your money as if it was our own, not just spending willy-nilly and running into these kind of things all too often. I'm going to break from some of the local stuff, and I'm going to ask, I don't know if any of you or how many of you are paying attention on social media, but there is a citizen journalist named Nick Shirley who has gotten over 100 million views for his exposing of healthcare centers and child care centers in the state of Minnesota with the waste and the fraud and abuse totaling in somewhere, I believe it's now broken $110 billion. We're talking about healthcare facilities and childcare facilities. Childcare facilities in one that the phone numbers don't work, and there's no children at them at all, at numerous times of the day. So the state of Vermont is not the only state dealing with the waste, fraud, and abuse. But the reason I say that is we've got a small state with regard to population. We've got a very large budget with respect to our money. It would be a better idea for us to be watching our money a little bit closer, because, well, for the legislature to be watching our money, because you know this already, but I'm just going to say it for the few that don't realize it. The legislature, the government has no money. It's your money. And we need to be watching it and showing you the respect that you deserve when it comes to your money. You work hard for your money. If you're going to send your tax dollars to us as a state, then the least we could do is watch it and use it frugally so that we don't have to keep coming and telling you, oh, guess what? There's going to be a 12% increase. Like there's this possibility for it. And we don't have that kind of money to be spending. We need to be looking at, like I said, how many of you, I would really like to know how many of you would love to see a budget smaller this year than there was last year. Because we know, okay, $71,000 with this respect to this one nonprofit was apparently used for personal use, $71,000. That could have gone to something else that it obviously didn't go to. Now, multiply, I'm not saying all, but even if half of those nonprofits had somebody misusing funds, that's a lot of funds, ladies and gentlemen. That's a lot of hard-earned tax dollars that didn't need to be wasted. And we need to be watching your money like a hawk. We need to be, there's a Milton Friedman did a little thing about how if you spend your money on you, that's the best way to know that you've spent your money in the best way possible. And the way to spend money in the least effective way possible is to spend someone else's money on someone else. And that, unfortunately, is what we have with taxpayer dollars. And we need to have the attitude that it's our money and that we need to watch it like it's like we really need to have the trust and the confidence of the voters and the taxpayers of the state. And going back to our first segment, where the author says how he's basically is expressing his loss of confidence, we need to do everything we can to regain that confidence. And by showing fiscal responsibility, looking at programs, finding ways to shave the budget. There's got to be ways to shave the budget, to trim the budget. If somebody in a department comes to you and tells you there's no way they can shave money, and they keep doing that year over year over year, then there's got to be something going on. We can't just, there's no way we can just keep increasing our budgets like this. Unless, of course, you'd just like to change all the signs that say welcome to Vermont Green Mountain State and just change them to welcome to the Green Mountain Country Club, so that everybody can know that their tax dollars are basically membership in the country club. And if you want to keep out the riffraff, then you just keep the dues high enough so that the riffraff can't afford to stay here or live here, right? And I'm sure some of you got a chuckle out of that, but that gets talked about a lot, and it needs to be taken into consideration when we are sitting and debating all of the budget items, every line item in the budget this year. Every line item needs to get scrutiny. And I'm sure, I know some of the people on the money committees, and there is a lot of scrutiny, but there are some who go before the money committees and they just act as if up behind the State House there's a money tree. And ladies and gentlemen, I haven't found it yet, and I don't believe it exists. So I'm going to keep harping on some of the top three things that we keep hearing from you, the hardworking, tax-paying, peace-loving, law-abiding citizens of Vermont. We want to get back to a safe Vermont. We want to get back to an affordable Vermont. And the way we do that is by keeping you informed, having you do your homework, contact your legislators so we can make change. We've come to the end of another show, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, stay safe, stay informed, listen to Right Side Up.